Before we start the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. And now, let's go. Story 1. 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. I get paid to pull the hares. Down in the tunnels, far below the city, they grow in clumps. I don't pay you to ask questions is what my boss told me on day 1. Seemed fair enough, the pay was good, and what I was doing didn't seem particularly harmful. Before work every day, I would put on the suit, the boots, the oxygen mask, grab the equipment, and journey down into the tunnels to pull hair. When you first get in, it seems like a normal tunnel system, like one that'd lead to a subway system. But all that it led to was more corridors, miles and miles of branching concrete pathways leading nowhere but back into each other. It's an anxious feeling, hearing the sound of rushing cars on the highway above, completely isolated in the dark tunnels in a heavy suit. I was comforted a few weeks into the job by sneaking my phone into my suit to listen to podcasts, something they said I wasn't allowed to do. For your own safety, you should hear, my boss would say. Partway in, after about 5 minutes of walking, all sound and air from the outside world was suddenly cut off, and I'd have to put on my mask. It was impossibly dark and incredibly lonely. It was at this depth that you'd start to see the bristles, little black strands of hair poking out of the floor, walls, and ceiling. They wouldn't move much, only twitching and jittering slightly as you touch them. Unsettling as they may be, they're nothing to worry about. The one time I recall failing to put on my gloves before getting to that depth and curiously touching one of the bristles. Big mistake. I couldn't get the hair out of my finger for months. The guys gave me shit for it, calling me pube finger. At least my case wasn't as bad as Dog Boy. The poor kid never showed up to work again. Occasionally the bristles would need shaving, but that wasn't my job. I still had a ways to go. At some point, I'd reach a stairwell, and the bristles would increase in length and frequency. As the hairs increased in size, so did their movement. They twirled and wriggled weakly, making soft, scraping noises as they brushed against the concrete and each other. This point would always make my own hair stand on end. Something about the millions of tiny strands moving on their own deeply unsettled me. I would usually pick up my pace to get through this portion of the tunnels, as my job still lay further down. I once spoke with Dale, someone whose position lies in this portion of the tunnels. He said he got a strange satisfaction from yanking those squirming hairs from where they grew. And though I wouldn't personally call my job satisfying, it wasn't hard to understand what he was talking about. After a few turns left, right, down, left again, I'd reach another stairwell. Only a few more floors to go. It was at this point that it became difficult to walk. The hairs were long enough to the point that they'd tangle and catch your legs and trip you if you weren't careful. They were perhaps too big to move properly. Erratic squirming and wriggling was now reduced to light and meager jolts and jitters. The hairs coiled on the ground and draped from the ceiling. The concrete they sprouted from almost unseeable. Trudging through thick clumps of incredibly sturdy strands of hair, it's easy to get a little frustrated. I remember one time, my first day actually, I tripped and fell flat into the hair. I panicked and writhed as the hairs seemed to instinctively wrap around my body, pinning me to the ground. Luckily, we have tools to deal with such situations. This was definitely my least favorite part of the tunnels. Determined to reach the end, I'd make one final push and finally reach the last stretch. One more stairway down, I had finally reached my destination and could begin my work. At this point in the tunnels, the space opened up into a wide, open room, with pillars rising to the ceiling. The hair, now too big to move, dangled from the ceiling in long, thick ropes and pooled in an ocean on the floor. I would spend the next few hours grabbing as much hair as I could and yanking hard. It would strain and struggle, fuse to the concrete. I had gotten so good that I only needed to wrap some around my arm and pull as hard as I could to yank huge clumps of hair down from the ceiling and stuff it into a large bag. I nearly break my back bending over and pulling it from the floor as well. I would then begin the 15-minute walk back up the complex of hallways and stairwells, dumping all the hair into the truck, then journeying back down to pull more hair. It was strenuous, and I come home fatigued, but it's good exercise, I guess. It was easy to get lonely all the way down there, though I can't say I'd be happy to meet another person there, which is why my most recent shift has seriously disturbed me. As I was stuffing the last bag full of hair and ready to leave the tunnels for the day, I heard someone talking. I took my earbuds out and turned off my phone to make sure I wasn't hearing things. Sure enough, further into the darkness, beyond my line of work, I heard the sound of a man mumbling to himself. "Hello," I called out. Though my voice was muffled by the mask, they definitely heard me, as their speaking stopped immediately after. I was hesitant to check out the source of the voice, as the sound emanated further down in the tunnels. Then I was instructed to go. To my knowledge, I had 4 coworkers who worked in these tunnels at alternating times, each with our own assigned layer. Dale, George, and Isaac worked on the layers above mine. I talked with them often. We joked and theorized about our own job, about how weird it was and how we could possibly get paid so much when it didn't seem like we were doing anything. I feel like they've become good friends of mine in my time working here. Henry, who worked in the layer just below mine, didn't speak to anyone. I only recently found out his name. I suspected the voice I heard down there might be his. Who else could it be? Under no circumstances should any of you be in the tunnels at the same time, my boss told me. I could have just left, but I wanted to make sure Henry wasn't occupying the same space when we were strictly told not to. I trudged through the thick hair and walked further into the tunnel than I had ever bothered to go before. Leaving the wide open room, it led into a circular tunnel, unlike anything I've seen before. What was most odd was the further down the tunnel I went, the length and frequency of the growing hair began to shrink and disappeared completely. It was now simply a dark, echoey concrete tunnel, hairless, I suppose, like a tunnel should be. After minutes of walking through the straight, barren tunnel, I heard the mumbling again. I saw him, standing in the dark, speaking to nobody. "How about we snap you in fucking half? I don't care. It's not like you need to be alive anyway." He spat feverishly, facing away from me. "Are you talking to me?" I asked. "Of course I'm Dash." Henry whipped around and screamed, before his face relaxed upon seeing me. "Oh, you. I thought you were someone else," he whispered. I winced upon his sudden outburst. I then raised an eyebrow at his presence in this tunnel. Strangely, he wasn't wearing a suit, nor did he carry anything with him. He also looked strained, like one of the veins in his forehead would burst at any moment. "Are you supposed to be down here?" I inquired. Henry closed his drooling mouth and straightened up. "Nobody is," he said solemnly. After an awkward silence, he began moving towards me, then walked right by. I followed after, the two of us wordlessly trekking back up through the tunnels of hair. Freakishly, though Henry wore no suit, the hairs didn't seem to stick to him like they normally should. As he walked by, they avoided him like the same side of a magnet, pushing away with every step and movement. I didn't say a single word the whole way out. I didn't get paid to ask questions. We stepped out into the sun, and I loaded the last bag into the truck. Henry just stood there, staring out into the sky. I took off all my equipment and walked over to him. "You all right?" I questioned. Henry turned to me slowly, his expression gaunt and aged. I remember, when I was in my early 20s, I was freaking out over my hair. Henry began, rubbing his bald head with his hand. I was losing all my hair, and I hated it. I hated everyone and everything. It's hard to say going bald was the reason for that, but it's definitely what I fixated on. I listened intently to Henry's story, fascinated because I had never heard him speak before. I even tried killing myself one night over my hair. "Isn't that ridiculous?" Henry admitted. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. Henry's face soured, maybe realizing he shared too much. He then walked over to the truck and rested his hands on it. "Anyway, it's been a long day. You should take this with you." Henry reeled back his head, and I heard a low tremble. His whole body began to violently shake, and his eyes rolled into the back of his head. I took a step back nervously as he began to gurgle and howl, his skin turning red. All at once, he heaved forward, and an impossible amount of hair began shooting out of his mouth like a cascade. Meters and meters and meters and meters of thick black hair flew out from his throat and coiled in the back of the truck. My jaw nearly hit the floor watching the scene, a disgusting waterfall of hair streaming without cease. After a full minute of Henry convulsing, puking up hundreds of pounds of hair into the truck, he stopped. He wiped his mouth, said, "See ya," then left. I anxiously returned to base with the haul. The boss didn't question the unprecedented amount of hair I had come back with. If anything, he seemed pleased, speaking of giving me a promotion. I don't know. I think it might be time to get a new job, but I'll consider it. Story 2. I'll remember that night forever. Jet black eyes, ash in my lungs. It still watches me. It began in 2nd grade, on a morning so normal I almost forgot it. I tied my shoes, slapped together a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and packed my brand new Spider-Man backpack. By the time I boarded the bus to the museum, excitement ran throughout my body like electricity. I bounced out of the cracked leather seat and leaned so far out of the aisle I almost fell. That's when the old bus driver, Miss Marge, cracked her raspy voice like a whip from the front of the bus. "Sit down." I dropped back in my seat. Her deep, sunken eyes and the smoky scent that lingered around her were enough to pause my heartbeat. Luckily, I had Landon beside me. We met on the first day of school, where we bonded over Ben 10 and our Pokemon cards. Now, he gave me a teasing grin that told me to behave. "She scares me," I whispered to Landon, ducking my head while peering around the seat at Miss Marge's rigid silhouette. Her knuckles were white as bone as she gripped the dark rubber of the wheel. When we arrived at the museum, we gathered with the teachers and chaperones in front of the museum's decorated entrance. They started to divide us into groups of 3, assigning us the job of looking after one another and keeping each other in check. I was excited when Ms. Landers met my eyes and called my name. "David, we're going to be in a group with Landon." She glanced around, searching for any other students who hadn't found a pod yet. My heart sank as I realized only one classmate remained unassigned. It was Jenny. To put it kindly, Jenny was a troublemaker. Last week, she had put gum in a classmate's hair, and they had to cut it out. I'd never willingly spoken to her before, but now I had no choice. Under Ms. Landers' watchful gaze, I forced myself forward. My palms began sweating as I approached her, extending my hand, but before I could say a word, she pushed me away, eyes narrowed with irritation. "I'm not talking to either of you," Jenny hissed before disappearing into the swarm of students. Ms. Landers gave a weary sigh. I could tell she was exhausted from dealing with rowdy kids, and Jenny was just another burden on her shoulders. Leaning down on my level, she spoke gently. "I'll talk to her about her behavior," she said. "Let me know if you have any trouble with her during the tour. I'll help right away." I nodded, relieved to know I had backup if things went sideways. The tour around the museum was exciting. The halls were decorated and loomed far over our heads, giving the space a sense of grandeur. Landon and I couldn't help but laugh when we passed the prehistoric human section. The wax figures had broad foreheads, big nostrils, and funny facial expressions as they sat frozen on a log. "That one looks like Miss Marge," Landon said, giggling and pointing at the figure that held a rock while examining it. I laughed with him as we pretended to hold spears and act like our early ancestors. We passed a closed exhibit as we walked. The hall was dimly lit and cordoned off by velvet ropes, casting eerie shadows over several marble statues positioned throughout the space. Squinting, I thought there was the faintest flicker of movement among the statues, but the distance and darkness made it impossible to tell. Ahead of me, Jenny called out to the tour guide, pointing toward the roped-off area. "Can we go there next?" The tour guide offered her a polite, apologetic smile. "That's actually a new exhibit still under construction. It'll be at least another month before it's ready, I'm afraid." Jenny didn't reply. Instead, her expression soured, and she stared beyond the ropes, fixated on whatever had captured her interest in the shadows. Out of all the exhibits we explored, the dinosaurs captivated me the most. Standing beneath the towering skeleton of a triceratops filled me with wonder. I vividly imagined it alive, its horns sharp and imposing. Then my imagination took another turn, picturing a fierce battle between it and a T-Rex. While lost in my daydream, I barely noticed Landon nudging my shoulder. "Hey, have you seen Jenny anywhere?" "I haven't seen her for a little while." I snapped back to reality and took a moment to survey the area. Scanning the faces of the other students, I realized that Landon was right. Jenny was nowhere to be seen. "Where do you think she went?" I asked, but Landon responded with a shrug and a mumbled, "I dunno." Frustrated with the turn of events, I said, "I'm going to go find her before the teacher notices. I don't want us to get in trouble because we lost her. You just wait here." With that, I slipped away from the rest of the class and went farther into the museum. I passed paintings, old artifacts, maps, and more, but there was no sight of her. Growing concerned, I broke into a brisk jog, leaving little clacks on the floor as I went. I slowed when I reached the closed sculpture gallery. I glanced over the sign propped near the front entrance that detailed how the gallery came to be. Many of these statues had recently been unearthed within a Pompeii dig site, which left me remembering the stories our history teacher told us. Men, women, children, and pets had been suffocated under the ash of a volcano that not even their gods could stop. The history made my heart ache and my stomach twist. Past the sign, a biting cold blew from the darkness emanating from the area, making me want to continue my search somewhere else. However, looking into the dark, I saw Jenny walking through the exhibit and disappearing past my view. A feeling of responsibility drove me to continue. I gripped the straps of my backpack and pretended to be like Spider-Man as I crawled into the closed-off area. The smell of cleaning products lingered in the air, but it couldn't mask the hints of old stone dust. Walking through the darkness, I was distracted by what I saw. Detailed busts and complete statues made from marble surrounded me from every angle. Some of them were clearly ancient, with brown stains lining the creases of their clothes and the wrinkles of their faces. Others looked newer, as if they had either been polished or cleaned specifically for this exhibit. Yet that wasn't what scared me. Each of their expressions were filled with fear and anguish. Wide eyes, open mouths, and silent screams were expertly portrayed. If they hadn't been made out of stone, I would have expected them to blink and breathe. The room grew darker as I walked deeper inside. My footsteps echoed against the floor throughout the quiet darkness. The statue's stares seemed to fall on me. I didn't want to spend any longer there than I had to, so I started calling out for my missing group member. "Jenny, where are you? We need to go back with everyone else, or we'll get in trouble." My words were met with silence. "Jenny, come on." When I made my way around the corner, I was stunned by what I saw. Jenny was standing in front of a sculpture carved from jet black stone. It depicted a nude man, towering at least 10 feet tall, with black-colored ash surrounding his feet. Rippling muscles stretched beneath his stone skin, veins snaking down his forearms like living tendrils. He looked almost alive. As I turned my attention back to Jenny, I noticed she held a stick of chalk she must have stolen from the classroom. Without remorse, she quickly started scribbling along the black leg with the chalk, which left large white streaks. I sprinted over to her and wrestled it out of her hand before she could continue. "What are you doing? We have to clean that off." I whispered with the force of shout as I tried to use the cloth from my shirt to wipe away the graffiti, which only spread the mark as Jenny laughed. "You're so annoying, it's just chalk. Nobody's going to care." I rolled my eyes and continued to clean the mess she created. As I went, I thought I saw the shadow cast from the statue move ever so slightly, but upon closer inspection, I didn't notice anything different beside the small cloud of dust falling from its hand. After I finished wiping away as much of the chalk I could, I turned to Jenny and grabbed her by the wrist as I pulled her away from the statues and out of the exhibit. "We need to get back to class before the teacher finds out what you did." She was quick to scratch my arm and pull away. "Don't touch me. I'm not done here," she yelled as I shushed her, trying to keep the situation under control. That was until I saw the statue she had written on was staring directly at us with a feverish scowl. He looked almost alive as his curled fingers reached toward Jenny. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. Slowly, his hand reached further until it almost caressed her hair. Without any control over my body, a scream tore from my throat. Instantly, the statue's head snapped toward me, its movements unnervingly fluid. Then, without a sound, it stepped back onto its podium, freezing in place once more. But its face had changed, twisted with fury, its eyes burning into mine. It knew I had seen it move. Jenny turned to look behind herself, but hadn't noticed what I saw and laughed. "What are you yelling about, scaredy cat? Did one of the statues make you pee yourself?" she taunted, but I didn't fully process what she said. I couldn't find the strength to move or speak. My eyes stayed latched to the statues. I feared if I looked away, he would move again. "Hey, are you okay, weirdo?" Jenny continued, her tone gentle. I grabbed her by the wrist and started sprinting with her to the exit as I ignored her protests. As we ran, I looked over my shoulder, and the statue had changed position. With an almost bony finger, he pointed directly at me. By the time we made it far enough away from the gallery, we were both out of breath, and Jenny shot me a nasty glare. "What's wrong with you? What are you freaking out about?" she spat, but I could tell my actions had scared her a little as well. "There was a statue. It tried to grab you," I said, knowing she wouldn't believe me. In response, Jenny rolled her eyes at me. "Stop messing with me," Jenny said, her voice wavering despite her harsh words. She crossed her arms defensively, but I noticed how her eyes kept darting back toward the gallery entrance. "Just leave me alone, loser." She started walking back toward the rest of the class, shoulders hunched. I hurried after her, heart still hammering in my chest. Despite our differences, I couldn't let myself be alone after what I had just seen. Once we made it back to the tour, I saw Landon looking around the museum for the two of us, and once we made eye contact, the furrow in his brow relaxed. Without anyone noticing, Jenny and I merged back into the group, and Landon started to ask questions. "Where did she go? And why are you so red?" I didn't know how to respond at first. I wondered if I should tell him about the statue, but I wasn't even sure if what I saw was real or my imagination. She was in the statue room. After I found her, we ran back to the group so we wouldn't get in trouble. Landon seemed satisfied, and we went back to listening to the tour guide, but I couldn't focus. Something was watching me. It was instinctive. I was prey under the watchful eye of a predator. Yet no matter where I looked, I saw nothing that could be causing this reaction in me. But I could smell it. Old stone and ash assaulted my nose, pungent and sharp in the air. The rest of the tour was uneventful. The excitement I had for the trip drained from my body and was filled with dread. The bus ride home was quiet. I barely spoke, and Landon noticed. "Are you okay? You look worried." I shook my head, offering a flat smile. "I'm okay, just tired." The conversation ended there. A few minutes passed in silence before I noticed Jenny glancing at me from across the aisle. She shifted in her seat, eyes flicking away when I caught her looking. Then, with exaggerated nonchalance, she patted the empty space beside her. Once, then twice, like she wasn't sure why she was doing it until I sat next to her. "Hey, you were just messing with me earlier, right?" I felt bad that she was scared, but I wanted to be honest with her. "No, I wasn't lying. The statue tried to grab you after you drew on it. That's why I grabbed you and ran." Jenny went silent for a moment and looked out the window as she quietly spoke. "I didn't think it would." She fell silent for a moment before continuing. "I'm going to punch you if you're lying," she paused. "But thanks." When I made it home, the sun had started to set. I walked inside and was met with the smell of dinner. My mom worked over the pot while my father cleaned the used dishes. When I walked into the kitchen, they both greeted me happily. "Hey, bud, how was the trip?" my dad asked. I tried my best to skirt around the subject. "It was good. I'm exhausted, though, so I'm going to go to bed." Mom's brow arched. "Aren't you hungry, hon? You've been out all day." I shook my head no. I ate some snacks my friends had on the bus. This was enough for my parents to let me go to bed early. I walked quietly up the stair into my room and closed the door. I fell into my bed, and for the first time after seeing the statue, I felt safe. I cradled myself in my blankets and pillows and fell fast asleep. As I slowly awoke, I felt that my fingers were half numb and snot ran down from my nose. My room was dark and cold, and I shivered as I sat up and wrapped myself completely in my covers. It took a few minutes to realize my window had been opened, with my curtains blowing softly in the crisp autumn air. The wind carried a faint, familiar scent, the smell of ash and stone. The cold of my room intensified tenfold as I became suffocated by the stench. It laid thick in the air, but there was no sign of what caused it. Slowly, I stood up from my bed, still wrapped in my covers. I made my way to the window, and I froze. Along the windowsill were smudges, long, pale fingerprints, smooth and ridgeless, as if carved in wax. My stomach twisted. The window was 2 stories off the ground. Fear left my arms paralyzed at my side. My room was on the 2nd floor of my house, far out of reach of anyone who could have wanted inside. I slammed the window shut and locked it in place while trying to slow my heart. Watching me at the edge of the forest line, fully exposed in the moonlight, stood the statue. The large chalk stain along his shin stood illuminated by the moon. In front of him was a shallow grave carved from the grass and earth. His face grew into a vicious smile, and, ever so slowly, his hand raised higher until it pointed directly at me through the window. Story 3. 3 months ago, I got a job offer from a company I'd never heard of. No interview, no background check, just an email. Dream research assistant needed. Quiet night work. High pay. Must be discreet. I thought it was a scam, but I clicked anyway. I was 2 months behind on rent and tired of grinding delivery apps and night shifts at a gas station. 2 days later, I was standing in a windowless room at the back of a warehouse on the edge of town, reading a non-disclosure agreement that might as well have been written in blood. You will not share any details about the work, equipment, or subjects. Any breach will be met with legal and appropriate consequences. I signed it. I shouldn't have. The room I worked in had 2 chairs, 2 monitors, and 1 machine, a dome-shaped thing about the size of a watermelon, covered in metallic wires and nodes. The label read, Mimir Neural Sync Unit. They said it could interface with REM wave activity to let us observe and catalog dream visuals in real time. I didn't ask how it worked. I just did what they told me. Every night from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m., I came in, put on the headset, and watched people's dreams play out like grainy, half-finished films. My job was to log what I saw, tags, colors, symbols, emotions, distortions. Most of them were forgettable, bizarre, disconnected messes, like the mind dumping its trash into the subconscious. I watched a woman relive her wedding as a loop where her groom's face kept changing in her dead dog. A man had a recurring dream about drowning in cereal. One guy just sat in a red chair in an endless desert for 6 hours. I didn't care. I just tagged and logged. The pay was good. The work was quiet. Until shift number 27. That night, the dream opened with a man walking through a long white hallway. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He wore a dark hoodie. I couldn't see his face. His steps echoed. The hallway had doors, each with numbers. Room 11, Room 12, Room 13. He stopped at Room 16. He opened the door and stepped inside, and I felt cold. I wasn't just watching anymore. It felt like I was in it, like my thoughts had shifted into his. The room inside was familiar. Too familiar. Cracked white walls, a humming mini fridge, a ceiling fan with a broken blade, a desk with an old laptop and a blue chair. My room, down to the scratch on the window frame and the photo of me and my sister at the carnival. This was my apartment, the one I lived in right now. On the desk was my journal, the one I kept locked. In the dream, the man opened it. One line was written over and over in shaky block letters. They're watching you too. I ripped off the headset, hit the emergency alert button. First time I ever used it. No one came. The next day, I demanded answers. I found Dr. Calder, the lead researcher. What the hell was that last dream? I asked. That was my apartment. That journal, I've never shown anyone that. She didn't blink. ID hashtag 616T, I said. Who is that? She stared at me for a long time, then said calmly, You were told not to ask questions. But that's me, isn't it? I'm the subject. You've been watching me. A pause. A smile. No, she said. You're just the receiver. Then she walked away. After that, things got worse. The dreams weren't random anymore. They all started in that hallway. The same man. The same doors. Room 17. Room 18. Room 19. Every night, he'd open the next door. And each time, it was another place from my past. The classroom where I wet my pants in first grade. The church basement where I found my uncle passed out drunk. My sister's old bedroom, the night after the accident. Sometimes he just stood there and stared. Other times, he'd whisper things. Once, he looked directly into the dream feed and said, Why did you lie? I stopped sleeping. I'd go home, lie in bed, and feel like I was still being watched. The black van across the street. The flicker of the hallway camera, even though no one passed. I started having dreams outside of the lab. Dreams that felt like the ones I saw at work. Same angle. Same man. Except now, I wasn't sure who was dreaming whom. Then came shift number 42. The hallway ended. No more doors. The man stood at the last one. Room 23. Inside, it was pitch black. For a long time, he just stood there. Then he stepped in, and the feed went dead. A message appeared on the screen. Mimir sync terminated. Accessing deep core files. Another screen popped up. A split feed. On the left, a live camera view. The break room where I sat on lunch 20 minutes ago. On the right, an old video, grainy black and white footage. I watched myself sleeping. Years younger. Electrodes on my head. Someone whispering to me off camera. You're going to forget this. It's better if you forget. I threw off the headset. Ran down the hallway. The door I thought led outside was gone. In its place, a white hallway. With numbered doors. Room 1. Room 2. Room 3. I don't know how long I've been here now. Some nights I think I've escaped. I wake up in my bed. The world looks normal. Until I spot the man in the hoodie across the street. Until I turn on my phone and see a recording of my dream from the night before. I think the job was never real. I think I never left the lab. Or maybe I never applied in the first place. I just wanted a paycheck. What I got was a front row seat to my own breakdown. And if anyone's reading this, if this shows up on your feed, ask yourself, when was the last time you really woke up? Because I'm starting to think some of us are still dreaming. Story 4. She always questioned why I was wearing makeup. Is it for a boy? Why are you wearing it today and not yesterday? Why are you doing it different today? Back in high school, I could never catch a break from her. She was my best friend since middle school, and there were literally zero boundaries between us and her mind. We had the same classes, sang in chorus together, and went to the same church. But even though her questions like these were irksome, it was best to not confront her head on, which I think I always knew subconsciously, even before knowing what I do now. I have a taciturn and deeply non-confrontational personality, so back then I would rather die than say the truth, which is to say I'd never admit to wanting to look attractive out loud. So I pretend that I did my makeup absent-mindedly just to end the conversation. We basically did the same song and dance every time I wore makeup. I found that it was just easier to lie. Or more often than not, just to not wear it, my looks and self-esteem be damned. More than anything, these are the things that I remember about my early high school days. While I think back to all those drawn-out hours with her at school, carpool, chorus events, summer camps, I remember specific things like her questions about my makeup, any changes to my hair, new clothes, etc. And not to sound like a queen bee, but it also seemed like if I bought anything new, she would too, jewelry, kids, dresses, ringtones for my cell phone. We had plenty of laughs and good times too, but the feelings that have persisted are the ones of insecurity and exhaustion from avoiding being on her bad side. I also remember her being a really tough hang. I couldn't bring any new friends or acquaintances around. She was loud, talkative, and needlessly abrasive to new people. If you looked up RBF in a dictionary, you'd see a picture of her being around someone she didn't know already. She was also an oversharer, especially with gross body stuff, and an overcommunicator. I couldn't log on to AAM without her already being there, literally at all hours of the night. She called any time she was driving from one place to another, and I learned that it was better to always answer, even if it was terrible timing. One time, I passive-aggressively didn't answer when she called. After 5 minutes, I gave her a call back. She didn't answer, but she returned my call immediately. I didn't answer her again and then called her right back. Guess what? She didn't answer, but again she called me right back. We did this back and forth a couple more times. It felt obnoxious in the moment, and even more so in hindsight. I came to the conclusion that she would never answer when I called. She'd only call me. One time I literally couldn't bring myself to answer. I was in one of those moods where I couldn't stomach even a 5-minute conversation. So I texted her and said I couldn't talk, and asked what was up. She never texted me back and literally didn't speak to me for an entire week. Apparently, she was going through something and really needed me that day. But honestly, I don't believe that it was anything out of the ordinary. I don't remember what eventually broke the silence between us after that tiff, but I remember feeling happy that we were on speaking terms again. After less than a day, it was like it never happened. Now, to the day that changed everything. It was a normal school day in late April. Definitely in that post-spring break season where the sun is shining and it's torture to be cooped up in a classroom. Another one of her quirks is that she had to know what I scored on every test and likewise would tell me what she scored. It was a frustrating expectation of hers. She had a habit of calling herself an intellectual without even a hint of irony, mind you, but in truth she was very, very smart, so she usually scored higher than I did. But one time in English I aced the test while she got something worse, but respectable, like an 87. She asked what I got as soon as the teacher gave me my test back. I pretended not to hear her and put it face down on my desk while I rummaged in my backpack. In a flash, she stood up, reached across and grabbed my test before I knew what was happening. It was all so aggressive and happened so rapidly that I couldn't help but shoot her a nasty, what the hell kind of look. I remember us having an uncomfortable beat or two of eye contact, and then her looking at my test, after which her face darkened severely. Whether it was my test result or my honest reaction to her invading my privacy and personal space, I had deeply offended her. What made matters worse is that everyone noticed since it was a sort of violent disruption to a quiet classroom. After that incident, again I got the silent treatment, but this stretched for more than 2 weeks. She was not speaking to me in the mornings at carpool. She skipped course events, and at school, it was just strange. I would look in her direction, and she'd pretend to not notice me. But when I wasn't looking, I could feel her watching me. It was so weird, but I was not in a hurry to mend fences with her. One day after school, I got a text from her. This was so many years and phones ago, so I don't remember specifics, but it had something to do with a school assignment. There was no apology or warmth, or even an attempt to awkwardly address the situation. The text was so random, and I felt like she was fishing for a reaction, so I didn't answer. I wanted to actually have a conversation, and if she couldn't handle that then, I was also fine, just moving on. I wasn't going to let her dictate how we were going to resolve things. Later that night, she sent another message on AIM that asked if I saw her text, and also if she could come over right then. I logged off immediately, so I wouldn't feel compelled to answer. It was all really weird. She wasn't at school the next day. I didn't think too much of it, except that it was refreshing to not have to ignore her for a full school day. That afternoon, one of our assistant principals showed up to my biology classroom and asked for me to accompany him to the principal's office. My principal began asking me questions about my friend and about her interest in computers, which I didn't know how to answer. I said that she's a whiz at AIM, but that's about all I knew. Turns out, my friend had made a hit list naming me directly. My principal had printed it out for me to read, and it was some of the most vulgar things I've ever read. He explained that she tried using an offshore router in her email to the school the day before, but they were able to easily pinpoint her IP address and alert the actual authorities. From there, my recollection gets blurry, but I remember getting a police escort home from school that day with a helicopter overhead and everything. She was sent to juvenile detention and then eventually to a girls-only mental institution in Florida for a short stint. I don't think she was ever formally convicted, but she was expelled. Her family moved that summer a few towns away and enrolled her at a private school. My principal would check in with me randomly from that point until I graduated a few years later. I think he did that because he wanted to let me know that the administration was thinking about me, but I'm sure he was also angling to see if I received any threats, which I thankfully never did. So many years have passed, and I honestly don't think about those days too often. They were confusing and frustrating years, and the meeting with the principal and the fallout with my friend happened in quick succession. Every now and again, I'll see her on social media, and her name comes up here, and they're in conversations with family or old friends. I'm writing this all to give context. She just messaged me on social media, and I'm not sure what to do. Story 5. When I was a kid, my mother told me stories every night. As I lay snug and warm, she would regale me with tales of spirits who wander the forests of Bar Island. There were small ones which she called fork flyers, and larger ones known as the sledge stones, but the biggest of them all was Urit. He was a massive turtle with a head and face like that of a snail. 7 large horns formed a mane around his neck, preventing him from ever withdrawing into his shell. My mother would tell me that this is what led him to become the protector of the other spirits. Because Yorit could never withdraw, his only option when threatened was to fight to the end. She would weave fantastical tales of the 20-foot-tall beast batting away bulldozers and leering at corporate lawyers in a threatening manner. I had figured out by the age of 12 that most of my mother's stories were just that, stories. She had spent her college years among the environmentalists, and that was very much reflected in the tall tale she created. I guess I had inherited a bit of that drive from her, as I elected to join the forestry service. It was during my career there that I learned that Yorit was very real. Tuesday, February 9th, 1994, it started as a day like any other, and quickly took a turn for the bizarre. I stopped in at Henry's coffee shop as I did every morning. Henry and I exchanged our usual pleasantries, and he set right to work preparing my drink. By the time he turned back around to hand it to me, there had been a dramatic shift in demeanor. Henry had always been amicable, even friendly, but this was different. His eyes were as wide as dinner plates. His usually charming smile was just a bit more rigid than usual. It looked as if making my coffee had electrified Henry with happiness. Hey man, are you okay?" I asked. "Oh, you betcha. I just feel so good all of a sudden it's impossible not to smile," Henry replied, beginning to rub his own face as if his skin were velvet. "Well, let's hope you put some of that sunshine into my drink." I laughed and asked Henry how much I owed him. "It's on the house," Henry shouted, before adding, "In fact, free coffee for everyone." Henry's grand showing of goodwill had brought light into the hearts of everybody there. It's amazing sometimes how something so small can make people so happy. I was even more amazed to see the ripple effect it had caused. As I drove out of town on my way to work, I passed John's used car lot where he was putting up crudely made cardboard signs which read, "Zero money down, zero money ever." People were filing out of the local Walmart with cart after cart full of unpurchased goods. Everybody involved, be they customer or staff, was grinning from ear to ear. I heard people on the streets shouting greetings to one another. I watched the town mayor, Jonah Newport, climb into a car with a perfect stranger just because he had asked. For all intents and purposes, it appeared to be a new revolution of love and brotherhood unfolding before my eyes. The reality of the situation was much more complex. After the chaotic charity and fraternity of the morning, I was excited to get out into the forest and enjoy the stillness of nature. I spent most of the day walking the trails, checking for litter and signs of wildlife. By the time I had nearly finished my rounds, the sun had begun to sink in the western sky. If it weren't for the encroaching darkness of the evening, I may never have seen the streaks of glowing purple light darting around the trees. As I approached the area where I'd seen them, I began to hear noises. Wet, popping thumps followed by small screeches. The sound of rocks striking against rock, each time accompanied by a breathy coo. Another 20 feet, and I could see the purple streaks a little bit better. Leathery wings held their slight frames aloft, bodies no more than 2 inches across at their widest, with long drifting tails which ended in a 2-pronged pitchfork. My eyes widened as the implications of what I was seeing began to dawn on me. Flying forks? I thought, no wait. It was fork flyers. Creatures straight from my bedtime stories now danced before me, each taking its place in a great ring which made its orbit around some unseen object. I was rooted in place as I watched their silent parade. I noticed after a time that not all of the fork flyers were glowing with that unearthly shade of purple. The ones who had lost their shine peeled off from the rest and flew inward. In the stories my mother had told me, fork flyers were never mean unless they were hungry. That little tidbit is what drove me to make the unfathomably stupid decision to try and slip past the ring. I waited, taking care to identify a portion of the ring where the flyers glowed brightest. I surmised that the brightest of them might have been the most satiated, so I counted the seconds it took for my group to come around, and when it did, I ran like hell. Diving under the ring of flyers, I scrambled to my feet and ran for cover as fast as I could. The foolishness of my decision loomed over me, growing in size with each passing second until I had made it far enough to feel safe hiding once more. I moved between the trees, ears alert for any sign of hungry forks flying my way. When I finally saw him, I was stunned. It was Urit. He was everything the stories said he was. Easily 40 feet from head to tail. His 7 horns protruded high into the sky, each leg a mighty trunk like that of a redwood. He was magnificent. He was awe-inspiring, and he was dead. The fork flyers covered every inch of exposed flesh. Hundreds upon hundreds of pitchforks stabbing into Urit's increasingly mangled body. More stood in wait, perched along each of the 7 horns which crowned his head. As they fed, the tails of the flyers began pulsing with a faint light which suffused their bodies. My earlier suspicions were confirmed when a flyer, the most luminous of his cohort, flew away to rejoin the great ring. I could see groups of blue humanoid figures sitting in tightly knit circles. Each one had a large, rough patch on their forehead. They took turns bashing these patches against Urit's shell, attempting to break it open. When their efforts were successful, the peaceful, cooperative circles turned into violent feeding frenzies. Elbows flew with wild abandon as each of the sledge stones fought to rip away chunks of the grand turtle's flesh. Unlike the fork flyers, the sledge stones did not seem to ever reach satiety. I was so engrossed in watching the beasts of my imagination devouring the hero of all my favorite stories that I had failed to hear the sound of leathery wings slipping through the night air. The fork flyer must have been making its way to Urit when it spotted me and decided I might be easy prey. As it approached me, the flyer's tail stretched impossibly far, impossibly fast. The twin prongs of its tail planted themselves on both sides of my neck, narrowly missing a fatal blow. The prongs atop its head were the next to come. Another miss, with the creature's vicious face held mere inches away from me by its own tools. Teeth lined its oval mouth, gnashing and screeching in its struggle to reach me. I would love to say I took action, that I dislodged the creature's tail to make my escape, but I didn't. I didn't even scream. I just stared at the flyer as it snapped and screeched at me, knowing I was trapped. A streak of blue obliterated the winged devil before colliding with a tree in its path. The flyer had been destroyed, but the tail remained lodged in the tree, holding me still. Its severed head continued to gnaw uselessly at the distance between us. A sledge stone, late to the party, had arrived just in time to save my life. It got up, shaking the concussion out of its head, and locked its eyes on mine. The blue giant was easily 9 feet tall. It was covered in hair, like the fur of an animal, and it was beginning its charge. I moved as much as I could manage, only just avoiding my right leg being turned to paste. The vibrations from the impact loosened the flyer's abandoned extremities. I pushed with all the strength of desperation, and I was made free, but not yet safe. The sledge stone was recovering quickly. I ran like hell through the forest, all the while made aware of my pursuer by the thunderous slam of its skull against tree after tree. I drove straight home and didn't come out of my bedroom for 2 days. Tuesday, February 10th, I had thought that isolation would be good, that it would help me sort out my thoughts, but in reality, I was only spinning in circles. I had a long list of questions to answer, and I had gotten stumped by the very first. How was any of this real? These were supposed to be nothing more than legends that teach kids lessons. Like the legend of Yahankaru, a shapeshifter who would lurk in the shadows of prosperous civilizations, stealing away anyone who allowed it to lure them to a secluded area. Easily the most heavy-handed metaphor for stranger danger I had ever seen. Wednesday, February 11th, I made my way into town for a coffee and a bit of normalcy. As he made my drink for me, I noticed that Henry's lunatic grin now needed to be frequently reapplied. Whatever ecstasy had overcome the town seemed to be fading. The signs at John's now half-empty car lot had been changed to say, $2 down. Get out of town. The employees of the depleted Walmart shrugged at customers perusing barren shelves. The same vehicle that had picked up the mayor was now offering Harvey Potler a steak dinner if he got in the car. Harvey accepted the offer in the end. On the surface, it was all still friendly, but the cracks were beginning to show. I arrived at the ranger station to find my superior, Terrence Howard, not that one, with his head in his hands. People had been going missing along trails in record numbers, and not just near our station. All across the island, men and women were failing to return from things as mundane as trips to the grocery store. I tried to tell him what I had seen in the woods, but I couldn't find the words. In the end, I only irritated him further with my stammering. Damn it, Brantley, either spit it out or get the hell out of my office. I don't have time to play charades when half the fucking town is missing. He glared at me as he spat out the words. I couldn't find a way to explain without landing myself in a straitjacket. I thought maybe it would be easier if I showed him. Will you come with me? I asked timidly. I can't find the words. Terrence Howard's expression softened. Terrence was a good man, albeit a good man under an extreme amount of stress. He sighed. Fine, he said, but we need to be back before noon. We stared at the churning festival of consumption for what felt like days. The flyers continued their skewering of the great beast. Sledgestones crowded in larger groups as the available real estate on Yoret's back dwindled. New species of creature had turned up to the feast. A face set in a flat area about the size of a beach ball, with 5 appendages reaching toward the sky. They resembled human hands sprouting from the ground. Using their fingers to climb, they made their way to one of the Sledgestone's abandoned portholes before setting their rat-like faces down in the entryway. Wolves the size of moose stalked around the corpse, slipping in to tear away chunks of destroyed flesh before retreating to their pack. Their jet black fur danced with greens and blues as they ran. It was 1:45 when Terrence turned to me and asked the question that had been burning in my mind since I found Yoret. What the fuck? Yeah, was all I could offer. Why didn't you say anything when you found it? Terrence asked. Respectfully, sir, I had no idea how to explain this. I replied. That's fair, he said. What the hell are we supposed to do about this, Brantley? I was relieved beyond measure to hear that. If I were going to be grappling with the impossible, at least I wouldn't be doing it alone. Easy come, easy go, I guess. We were halfway back to the station, walking together in stunned silence when we first saw them. Dark shadows in the depths of the forest. Terrence must have noticed them first. He spoke quietly. Keep your eyes trained forward and do not slow down. I don't know what they'll do if they know that we're aware of them. It's just a quarter mile to the station now. The small sign signifying the first set of guest restrooms verified his words. I did as I was told, never letting my attention wander too close to the many lights of unblinking eyes. Through my peripherals, I could see that not every figure was whole. Some only had a single glowing ember set deep into the skull. Others had tiny twin stars blazing in their ocular cavities. The figures were of different sizes, some big, some small. Some thin, some more rotund. Their unified gaze followed us all the while. Quiet, patient, hunters waiting for a chance to strike. We reached the station after 15 minutes, which each felt like 7. The feeling of elation from safely completing our journey hit me like a truck. I felt that as long as we could reach the station, everything would be all right. It wasn't until we had shut the door behind us that I remembered what we were doing. Nothing had changed. We had made no progress. We were only seeking a shelter from which to wonder about what the hell was happening. We were every bit as lost as when we had set out. We sat together in total silence for an hour or two. My mother used to tell me about these things. I said, in stories when I was a kid. I never thought any of it was real. Half of the time she would make Yoret, that's the dead guy, into a pseudo-Captain Planet figure. I continued, the ones with points at each end are called fork flyers. She called the blue ones sledgestones. She never mentioned the wolves or the hands. Perhaps it's related to some old folklore. Your mother had to get these stories from somewhere, right? Terrence Howard posited. I had been thinking much the same. I was ready to look up information on the town's legend when Terrence told me there was no need. I keep a book of old tales in my truck, and his face fell as if he were ashamed to say, I use the stories to scare hikers sometimes. I laughed at the admission as Terrence walked outside to retrieve the book. The mistake was revealed to me immediately. Terrence had been gone for just under a minute when the silence of the night was suddenly broke by the sound of 100 footfalls. In the middle of the cacophony, I could hear a single voice crying out. Wait, N.O. Brantley. Help! 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 The voice of my only companion in this crisis faded meekly into the distance, drowned out by the whooping cries of his captors. Thursday, February 12th, I filed a missing persons report. The clerk told me that Terrence would mark the 237th person to disappear. She informed me of this with an air that said, "Don't get your hopes up." I should have taken that bit of unspoken advice. The air in Henry's coffee shop seemed different today. He, along with his customers, had all adopted a slight scowl. The overall mood felt melancholic. Henry grumbled at my coffee as he poured it, and gave it to me with his other hand outstretched. "What? No more free coffee?" I asked unserious. "Please, just stop. I'm not in the mood for this kind of crap today." He bristled all over as I noticed the empty glass cases which usually held a variety of food items. "The city says I didn't have the proper permits for giving away coffee. If you ask me, they've got it out for me." "Oh geez, I'm sorry to hear that," I replied. "I'm in it." Henry had always been kind. The town had come to view him as a staple. After all, what is the linchpin of society if not the local coffee shop? I put a $5 bill in the tip jar and went on my way. John's signs had changed once again. This time they read, "I like money too, and no." I could see John through the window to his office. He seemed to be hard at work, crafting tomorrow's message. Elizabeth Stoltz, an older woman with a fiery temper, was in a one-sided shouting match with the vehicle which had been collecting townsfolk. "How dare you proposition me, sir? I'm a lady. I will not be getting into a car full of strange me." Her sentence cut off as a wiry arm reached out in a flash and dragged her into the vehicle through the window. I tried to catch the car's license plate number, but the letters appeared to be shifting constantly. If anybody else on the street had noticed, they didn't give any indication. I decided I would go and try to retrieve the book Terrence had mentioned. The journey was largely uneventful. Once or twice during the drive, I caught sight of people hiding poorly behind trees. You know that thing kids do, where they hide behind something that barely obscures your vision of them? It was like that. The book was not worth the uneventful drive. Aside from a passing mention of Urit, I found absolutely nothing. No fork flyers, no sledge stones, nada. If my mother were still with us, I could ask her directly where her old stories came from. In that moment, I missed her more than usual. I sat back, drinking in the silence of the ranger station, thinking of the woman who had raised me, bereft of answers. Still, I found myself curious about the state of Urit. After what had happened to Terrence, I was taking no chances. I fired up the drone we used to scout for missing hikers and sent it on its way. Shards of shell littered the clearing. Every inch of ground not covered by the fragments lay, soaked in a viscous purple fluid. The fork flyers had disappeared from the immediate area, seemingly all moving to the great ring which still made its orbit around the corpse of Urit. The sledge stones were standing in a massive huddle, desperately beating back the titanic wolves which had appeared. The hands had grown additional appendages which slithered their way across the bloody ground, looking to grab up anything it found. One of the hands, which had used its newfound tentacle to snatch up a sledge stone, was pierced from within by a coalition of crimson worms. Their slender bodies tapered into points that looked sharp enough to pierce Kevlar. I turned the drone around to bring it home, only for it to be chased down and knocked out of the sky by a curious fork. It seemed to me that the feast was reaching its end. There wasn't enough of Urit left to sustain the creatures, and they had begun to turn on one another. Perhaps this problem would solve itself. If I could just wait a few days, the corpse would be fully depleted and all this craziness might finally end. So, of course, shit hit the fan the next day. Friday, February 13th, Bedlam had come to town. Henry stood outside of his coffee shop yelling at passersby. "My business is failing because you greedy fucks don't pay for your coffee," he raged, stopping himself for a moment to say hello to me, before launching further into his tirade. I stopped in at the police station to check for any sign of Terrence, and I found more than I had bargained for. 250 missing persons had all shown up to the station that morning, and among them were Harvey Potler and Terrence. I was elated. "Terrence," I shouted, causing him to stumble slightly in surprise. "I'm so glad you're okay. What the hell happened?" Was his initial reply, hastily adding, "Oh, that. Yeah, I got loose about an hour after they took me. Ran all night. Thank goodness I found a trail. I could have died out there, Brantley." "Dude, I know. I finally took a good look at him. Terrence looked like shit. His clothes hung loosely off his body. Occasionally a rib would show through the shirt as he moved. He was emaciated, as if he had been starving for days when no more than 36 hours had passed. In fact, all of the returning vanished looked brutally thin. I brushed it off, making a mental note to get this man a cheeseburger ASAP. As we drove aimlessly through town, the relationship between Terrence and I was flipped on its head. Usually I'm the one making impractical suggestions to irritate Terrence. Today, apparently, it was his turn. Maybe we should go scope out the corpse again, he said. I don't see much point in that. I replied. The scene had remained, at its core, largely the same since I had discovered it. With the feast tapering off, I didn't know what information we could possibly glean from another look. Terrence, to his credit, dropped that particular suggestion. However, it was immediately followed up with another. Well, there's all these old sewer tunnels. Maybe there's something to investigate down there. He sounded desperate. I understood exactly how that felt. I just wanted an answer. I would have gone down into those sewers had I seen anything at all to suggest they held clues for us. The sewers? Are you feeling okay, man? I was worried about my friend/boss. He had been abducted by creatures of the forest. Who knows what that's like other than him? I could forgive him for being in a bit of fog. Yeah, I'm totally fine. I just think we should go somewhere that nobody else goes. If there was something to see where people go, then somebody would have seen it. We should be checking the areas where there are no other PO dash. His words were cut off by the shattering of the passenger side rear window. John stood at the edge of his empty lot, shotgun in hand. He had a look on his face of bewildered animalistic rage. He racked another shell and took aim once more. The pellets punched dozens of tiny holes in the passenger side door. They tore around Terrence's legs, some even leaving holes in his pants. Miraculously, he was unharmed. I sped away as fast as the vehicle would allow. Everywhere we went, there was chaos. Walmart was completely engulfed in flames. People shouted obscenities at one another. Fights to the death were breaking out over every minor disagreement. Terrence and I had been watching Jane Turnbull, giving Gabe trying to beat down over the good card at Aldi. Suddenly, Terrence stiffened before saying "too late" and sprinting away into the streets. I gave chase, but he was impossibly fast. I didn't catch up until we had made it to the town square. What I saw there made my next decision extremely simple. The formerly missing had converged on the area. They all stood around, slack-jawed and staring at the clock tower in the center of town. A straggler, who I recognized to be Jonah Newport, arrived on the scene, and it was as if a switch had been flipped. 267 bodies simultaneously disrobed. Their heads sat atop bodies devoid of flesh, held aloft and upright by nothing more than bones which had been brutally marred. Looking closely at Terrence, who was nearest to me, I could see the marks of gnawing teeth along every inch of exposed bone. The missing climbed over top of one another until they formed a massive human pyramid. Jonah Newport climbed to its apex and proceeded to dive directly into the mouth of Lane Thompson. As Jonah made his way toward the ground, the rest of the pyramid followed suit. Those standing on the ground were flung high into the air. The pyramid stood inverted as Jonah slid into the dry earth with a squelch. The others did not follow Jonah on his subterranean journey. Instead, their bodies smashed against the earth, their skeletons scattering in all directions, leaving only a pile of still animated heads surrounded by thousands upon thousands of bones. Each head was spewing a word salad the likes of which has never been seen. The cacophony of their pointless vocalizations was nearly as disturbing as what had led them there. That was when I made the best decision I had made all week. I left. As my battle-scarred Corolla rolled away from the town of Bar Harbor, I could just barely see a long line of purple streaks flying away from the clearing, which had become Yort's grave. Story 6. We don't know how long she's been here. Even some of the oldest people in our town admit she was already a legend when they were kids. After recent events, I need to write this down to make sense of everything. Lest I go insane. From my mother's story, she used to be a normal Mobbian. Her name is debated. Some say it was Swirl, others say it was Twist, and a ton others. She was a lemur, one that lived in Spiral Village herself. She was a cheery girl at the time, said to light up the town with her boundless energy. She lived alongside her love, a wolf whose name was said to be spoken in only whispers. They were said to be inseparable, constantly at each other's side. Some say it was a love so innocent and pure that it would make you feel lighter just being around them. However, one day, she found a note from her love, simply stating she had gone out to finish a fight she had long since started. She looked all day for the wolf, asking around to anyone she knew. Eventually, she found her, dead. Accounts vary on what happened. Some say that the wolf was stabbed to death, others that she had been shot, and others say that the lemur killed her herself, though the stabbing story seems to be the original from my research. On that day, people could hear the lemur's broken cries for miles, as her heart bled out alongside the wolf. She disappeared after that, gone for months, with no one knowing where she might have gone. The wolf was also reported missing, with no one knowing of her death at the time. But then, the wolf came back, seemingly fine, smiling even, though she seemed to get agitated whenever they asked about the lemur. No word was heard from the lemur, with the wolf seeming far too happy despite her love being gone. Some wondered what had happened, with rumors beginning. At that time, the lemur came back, seemingly fine. She greeted everyone with a smile. But something was wrong. Her smile, once so bright, now looked hollow, like a pathetic copy of what once was. Her movements were odd, limbs moving ever so slightly unnatural. Despite this, those who didn't know her personally were happy that she had returned. But those who did could tell something was amiss. Soon, everyone could see the problems between the wolf and the lemur. Their fights were constant, though they stayed together. Despite the attempts from others, they kept fighting. During this time, the massacre started. Those who dared commit crimes too horrid to speak of were found brutally murdered. First, it was small injuries, lacerations, and bruises. But it soon escalated until entire buildings were covered in flesh, with the monsters in them being brutalized beyond recognition, as if a demon had come from the depths of hell to punish them. But one day, the reason behind all of it was revealed. The lemur and wolf had been sent to find a criminal, one whose name has been forgotten. When they got there with their friend, they began the battle with them. During the fight, they had managed to cut the wolf's face, slicing through her skin. In that moment, the lemur froze, her body fading in and out of existence as the wolf panicked. She cried, repeating no over and over. When the lemur faded, the wolf turned, showing the lemur's face behind the wolf's skin. The rest of the story depends on the teller. Some say she was saved, others say she was a demon that returned to hell. But overall, she was still a legend I have seen with my own eyes. I'm an urban explorer, but beyond the ruins of Spiral City were the ruins of Spiral Hill Village. It had long since been abandoned, some say because of the lemur. I decided to explore, having never been there myself. I took a small amount of food and water, alongside some tools to get around, namely a crowbar, a camera, a rope, and a torch. The drive wasn't long, only taking around an hour to get there. As the village got closer, something I noticed was that the sky seemed to close up as I got closer. The clouds got darker, the wind colder, even the plants seemed to slowly get more and more wild, stretching and growing beyond what would be seen anywhere in the city limits. The whole place had a sense of abandonment, but more importantly, the feeling of utter sadness. A feeling that this had once been something great, not reduced to nothing but a forgotten memory. As I got out of my car, the sun wasn't visible through the clouds, but there was enough light to not need to waste my torch battery. I walked through the abandoned town, looking through the collapsing buildings. There were multiple things that I found: photos, art pieces, and even some jewelry. However, I didn't take anything, deciding to leave the ruins and the homes of these families as is. But as I walked, something felt wrong. I don't know how to describe it. It felt like there were eyes everywhere, like I had just entered somewhere that didn't want me. Like I had walked into some dark realm where I should have never entered. I didn't think much of it at the time. The weather and the overall state of the city made everything feel off, and I'm not ashamed to say that I'm not exactly the bravest, so the feeling wasn't something that came off as unnatural. So I foolishly walked in. However, two buildings seemed oddly fine. They had cracks and chips, but overall, you'd never know these were over 100 years old. The first was a museum, or at least I think it was, if the glass display panels and panels with some jewels everywhere were any indication. I looked through the main office, finding a drawer with some old documents. It had belonged to someone named Jewel the Beetle. I knew her. She and her family had formed the Jewel Museum in the city, where memorabilia and trinkets from past heroes like Sonic and Tails were kept. Nothing had ever been said of her living here before, but considering how long it had been since she had been around, it made sense. After placing the documents back and taking some pictures with my camera, I walked out and found another building. This one was a house, a big one. Entering it, the inside was light stepping back in time. The place looked untouched and completely clean. The carpets were pristine, the walls painted, and the air fresh. It threw me for a loop, making me have to recompose myself for a second. Once I did, I explored the home, finding multiple photos. They showed a wolf and a lemur. The lemur had her arm around the wolf, both of them smiling. They looked so happy, the lemur's smile so bright that I couldn't help but mimic it. Underneath the photo, a message was written. Tangle and Whisper, multiple other photos were around the house. Some showed them at a beach, one with them sitting beside a sheep, and another with them in what looked like a town center, and many more. Each one looked so happy and cheerful, a contradiction to the state of the town. As I looked and brought out a cloth and cleaned some of the photos as dust had piled up on some. As I did, the feeling of being watched eased a bit, though I didn't know why. I kept looking. I came upon a door leading to what I assumed was a basement. Going down, I found the door unlocked and walked inside. I wish I hadn't. Inside, the basement was hot, unnaturally hot. It was dark enough that I turned on my torch. The light shone on what looked like a massive map. Hundreds of photos and strings were strewn over it. Each photo showed a purple octopus with black eyes and white pupils. Journals and books lay around me, their writing so messy and chaotic that I couldn't even begin to understand them. But I couldn't focus on that as something caught my attention. That was a buzzing sound. Looking back, one of the support pillars for the basement was glitching. I know it sounds strange, but it was glitching, its form flickering in blue. It kept doing so before it finally disappeared. And a pillar of flesh is what I was met with. It reached the ceiling, stretching across it like a mold. Eyes bulged from it, all of them purple and watching him. And soon, everything around me began to glitch as more and more flesh formed around me. I fell to the ground as more and more eyes appeared, all of them staring at me. But that wasn't the part that truly scared me. It was when I heard footsteps from up above. I had come here alone. I knew that. And while it could have been another explorer, I knew it wasn't. Call it instinct, but my gut knew that whatever walked up above was no Mobian. The footsteps continued before they got close to the basement door. I ducked behind some of the furniture that hadn't disappeared. And not a moment too soon, as the door creaked open, the footsteps came down the stairs. What followed were ragged breaths, ones that sounded like the owner's lungs were barely holding on. I stayed quiet, hoping whatever had entered wouldn't see me. But as a violet light shone right at the furniture I was hiding behind, and eyes formed next to me, watching me, I knew that wouldn't be the case. The breathing got closer, the footsteps getting louder. I was barely keeping it together as I pulled out the one thing I had brought just in case. A bottle of pepper spray. I wasn't much, and I had wished I had brought something more powerful, but I would work, hopefully, right when I could hear the entity right behind me, and turned and sprayed them, and a horrific and high-pitched scream rang out. I got up from my hiding place and ran to the door, only turning back once to see what had entered. And I felt my heart stop. The entity had the body of a Mobian, but multiple appendages were sticking out of its body. Claws, arms, and what looked like cameras all sprouting from their back. But that wasn't the worst part. It was the fact that I knew the being in front of me. It was the lemur I had seen in the photos. Her white and blue fur was easily recognizable. Tangle, alongside the rotting skin of the wolf, of Whisper, I had seen in the photos with her. The skin was practically falling apart from her body, with some parts seemingly stitched onto the lemur. Entire parts were missing, showing the flesh beneath the skin. But I could see blood from what looked like scratches and knife marks on the lemur's real skin. Alongside that, I saw a strange three-pronged symbol in her right eye, now red from the pepper spray. It took me a moment to break out of the shock, but I ran up the stairs and out of the house when I did. No sooner did I leave the house than the entire village began to glitch as I heard what sounded like a guttural scream and wolf howl echoing from behind me. As it rang out, the buildings shifted as their walls were covered in flesh, eyes watching my every move, finally understanding why I had that watched feeling. Similar appendages to the ones that the lemur had formed from the masses, claws stretching out to grab me. Alongside it, camera-like appendages formed as well. They had the rough shape of a security camera, but instead of a lens, cloudy white eyes were stuck to them. Blood and mucus spilled under them as a purple glow came from them, following my every move. Things only got worse as I heard the sound of something running next to me. Looking up, I saw the lemur running along the rooftops, her eyes glaring at me as she chased me down. As I ran, I made it to the tree line as I ran through it. I could hear branches cracking as it still gave chase. I couldn't see her well, but I could hear her swinging along the branches, launching herself from tree to tree. I had almost reached my car before something grabbed my leg and yanked me to the ground. My forehead slammed against the ground hard, the sound of my camera going off hitting my ears. As I got up, I could feel blood slowly drip down and over my eyes. But I couldn't focus on that as the sound of growling hit my ears. Spinning around, I saw a tendril had wrapped around my leg, having sprouted from the lemur's back. She was glaring at me, crawling closer on all fours, like a wolf stalking its prey. As she got closer, some of those camera appendages formed before they started nudging her. She looked at them for a second as small tentacles extended from them and connected to her next. Her eyes glowed as she went quiet. Behind her, I saw myself. I saw myself going through the town for what I could only was the point of view of the eyes. They showed me looking through the buildings, being careful the entire time, putting the files from the museum back into the drawer, and cleaning the pictures back at the home. It went on like that for a few seconds before the lemur finally moved again, looking back at me. Her face, once filled with rage, now showed confusion and then understanding. She studied me for a second before her eyes widened, a quiet whine coming from her. One of the cameras formed as a purple light washed over me. It stayed for a second before it disappeared. Once it did, the lemur hand twitched before a strange symbol, one that matched the one in her eye, but was glowing purple, formed in her hand. Instantly, I felt the pain around my body fade, as the small cuts I'd gotten from the fall vanished alongside the blood. Once it was all healed, the tendril released my leg as the lemur got up and began to leave. She immediately climbed up the tree, giving me one more apologetic look before disappearing. After that, I picked up my camera and left. I know what I saw was the being from the city's old legend. The purple demon, the skinwalker, the solver. The same one they had used as a simple ghost story was the one I had encountered. I haven't told anyone close to me. God knows what they would think of it. But that wasn't the only reason. The only reason I had been let go, from what I could tell, was because I hadn't disturbed anything in the town and had even helped clean some of the objects. If I revealed its existence, no doubt more would go looking for it. I do not doubt that some of them would damage, if not destroy, the ruins to try and find the solver. And God knows what would do then. So I have kept quiet, but I'm sharing this now since it seems to have vanished recently alongside the ruins of Spiral Hill Village. I'm posting this here due to this being a more underground forum where everyone understands the danger of angering an entity like this. However, I'll leave you with one more thing. When my camera fell off and I took a photo when I fell, a photo was taken of the lemur of Tangle. I have attached it to this post. I beg anyone, if you have any information, please tell me, so I know I'm not crazy here. outdatedsolution.png https://post.ing cc/r33qtv6b. That's it for today's creepy Reddit tales. Before we go, I just want to say a quick thanks to all of you for watching, liking, and sticking around. You guys keep this channel going, and I'll be back soon with more stories that'll make your skin crawl. Drop a comment if you've got your own spooky tale to share, and I'll see you in the next one.